There are many different spiritual systems in the world that have different types of initiation programs that a person goes through. The Rosicrucian system is one that's been very influential in the West, but actually it's sometimes hard to get information about what their actual system of development is. What do we actually mean by initiation or an initiate? Because the terms are used very generally in modern metaphysical circles. But if you look at people that are being presented as initiates, they are often extremely different. One technical part of this is actually the structure of their consciousness, and the structure of their subtle bodies can be quite different from one to another, although they're being presented as initiates within different systems. There are 3 different aspects of initiation or becoming an initiate in one of these. What is actually being illuminated begins with the thinking process, with actually knowing about non-physical realities, knowing about the greater spiritual realities that we come from, and the spiritual depths of oneself. This is linked to the spiritual centers inside the head, and this is also linked to the illumination of the thinking process. So that with this process, we actually know consciously the structure of the spiritual world, how we interact with them, how they influence us on a daily basis. And within this Rosicrucian system, that would technically be known as an initiate, someone that actually understands the systems. In this path of illumination, we find that everything is a thought form from the mind of God. And all those thought forms have a pattern to them. And the current term that we use for understanding those patterns is sacred geometry. So sacred geometry is a universal science for understanding the patterns of creation at every level. And so, no matter what tradition you study with, they will work with sacred geometry because the sacred geometry of the highest level is a pure, packed thought form from the mind of God that shows you the pure pattern of everything that's manifested from it. Now the next level is that of the clairvoyant, and from one perspective, we could say this is linked to the illumination of the heart and the feeling life. The Rosicrucians talk about a process within an initiation in which, at a certain point, when the heart becomes open and unarmored, and we cultivate this feeling of unconditional love, there's an ignition of a kind of spiritual spark within the heart. And what happens then is that they describe it as an etheric rose light arises from the heart and moves up to what's commonly called the third eye center. And with that rose etheric stream, it enters into the centers in the head, that area that is technically at the third ventricle of the brain and was known as the Cave of Brahma in the Indian teachings. This is a particular area that's open in the head that has a space between the pineal and pituitary glands. And as this space becomes illuminated, it leads to direct spiritual vision. So the third aspect here is that there's also the cultivation of action, or of the will, and this is linked to the belly, or what in Japan they call the hara, or in Chinese alchemy they call the lower dantian. The lower will center is here, and through the action or willing form of illumination, one is able to take action esoterically. You're able to actually use non-physical realities to change things on the physical plane. Now, at the most extreme form of this, we have things like actual physical alchemy and the transmutation of one physical substance to another. This is usually attained after going through multiple steps of being able to transform something that is less dense, and that is normally etheric energy fields. So the actual vibrational transformation of energy fields, energy healing, things of that kind, is something that you find very strongly on this path. So the person that can actually transform things using spiritual forces is referred to as the adept. That gives us a bit of an overview for how this fits together. Within the Rosicrucian work, you find at a certain point that the consciousness body of the human being has 3 centers that can be worked on and awakened. And those 3 centers are around the head, the heart, and the hara. And this is really a universal teaching. If you study with the Buddhists, they'll talk about the thought, speech, and action. If you study with Sufis, they'll talk about the head, the heart, and the hands. All these different traditions are working with the same concept. If you study Chinese medicine or Chinese internal alchemy like Qigong, you'll know that they have the upper, middle, and lower dantian. They refer to these as elixir fields because when we understand what these actually are energetically, they are a kind of spiritual elixir field that we can work in and illuminate the forces of. So depending on where we focus on primarily, we can first begin to develop the capacity of understanding things in a conscious manner, the patterns behind them, become the initiate or directly perceive spiritual realities, the clairvoyant, or directly manipulate the spiritual forces, hopefully for a good outcome, and that's the adept. Initiation is really a process of becoming aware of, who am I? Why am I here? Where do I come from? And how do I develop a process by which I can become more self-aware and accelerate my process of development along the path of initiation? As you begin to understand processes other people don't understand, there can be the temptation to use that knowledge to manipulate other people or to manipulate all types of things. Let's say you understand psychology and somebody else doesn't. You can manipulate them with all types of things in neurolinguistic programming and things of that kind. What words do you use? What tonality do you use? How do you present the information? You can manipulate them all over the place. And so in Rosicrucianism, there's a very strong rule that all the powers and understandings gained on the path will be put to the service of other people. So that's like the first rule in Rosicrucianism. Otherwise, if you develop the abilities, you will get that temptation of, well, I could get what I want right now because they don't understand this process, but I do. So initiation and inner alchemy. Alchemy has to do with the transformation of something from a base state to a higher state. There's an important thing that's hidden in that, which is that the base state has to exist first. You're turning lead into gold. But there had to be the lead there first to create the gold. So this means that hidden within all types of lower structures are the seed of its full fruition, very much like the classical illustration of the caterpillar and the butterfly. You know, looking at the caterpillar that over time its entire structure has laid within it the ability to become a winged butterfly. But it's the exact same thing in the human being. So we develop the physical body. We develop the body of life force. We develop our consciousness. But then we come to the point of developing our self-awareness, the I am presence. And that's where we are today. Human beings have developed this. And now we're at this critical point of developing the I am self-awareness. Now the inner alchemy of this is that once we have developed that fire, this is represented in the esoteric Christian tradition as the flame above the head of the disciples of Pentecost. It's a literal flame that ignites a spiritual structure that moves in a vertical axis through the human body. At this energy center above the human head, it illuminates to be the center of the Holy Spirit within Christian depictions. But I've worked with people from many other religions who know all about this first center above the head and its ignition into higher consciousness. So as we develop that aspect of ourselves can now illuminate with light and transform with the fire the lower bodies. That means that then we can train our I am spiritual self-awareness to actually transform our consciousness to a higher level. It's an alchemical transformation of the consciousness to become something different of a higher nature. It can then transform our entire body of life force, the entire etheric body, chi, ki, prana, to a higher level. And then it can actually transform the physical body. So that then leads to the question of, okay, from this really big picture of how things fit together, what does one actually do as a system of initiation practices? One of the most fundamental practices for the Rosicrucians are what they call the 6 basic exercises. These 6 basic exercises were discussed by Rudolf Steiner as something that, if you did nothing else, you should do. This is because some types of occult practices that you engage in could actually end up being harmful to you. However, any of those harmful effects could be neutralized if you practice the 6 basic exercises. The first 3 parts of these exercises are again working with the basic idea that we have 3 basic soul faculties. This is the same as saying that our astral body has 3 different aspects: thinking, feeling, and willing. These can be understood as thought, speech, and action. Or in other traditions, the Buddhist head, heart, and hands, or the Sufi upper, middle, and lower Dantian, as seen in Chinese Taoism. We have these 3 primary centers: thinking, feeling, and willing. So the first thing we have to do, as Gurdjieff talked about, is to begin to self-observe. We have to observe ourselves through the course of the day. We have to observe what we are thinking, what we are feeling, and what we are doing. That act in itself, which was also described by the Buddhists in great detail, will begin to use the light of our consciousness to illuminate the thinking process, the feeling process, and the willing process. What this allows us to do is to begin to see how much of what we go through every day internally is completely unconscious. It becomes just one reactive state after another. You get a particular external trigger, and you have a particular reaction to it. This is the foundation. If you did this, you would end up reaching the goal. If you did nothing else, if you don't do this, nothing else you do will matter. You have to do the self-observation, and it's much harder to do than it sounds. Another practice is called the backward review. The backward review is very important to do at the end of every day. In Steiner's own initiation school, he made it a basic practice for everybody. The backward review involves, at the end of your day, as you're about to go to bed, intensively going backward through your day in reverse order. Now, you're at the moment just before you went to bed. Now you're at the point where you went to the bathroom, then the point where you watched TV, then the point where you had dinner, and so on. You continue this process all the way back to the point when you were last asleep, whether it was a nap or early in the morning. There are very deep spiritual processes behind this that we won't get into in all the details now, but it relates to some very important energetic processes in a human being. By going backward and thinking backwards, we are actually developing a new strength, almost like we're flexing a muscle within our etheric life body. The etheric life body is our body of memory, and it holds all of our life forces. When we begin to exercise the capacity to think backwards, instead of forging forward the way we normally do, we are actually exercising something in the life body of memory. This will become a force that can be used for higher initiation and alchemical purposes. Later on, we have the observation of life forces of growth and decay. Today we have this fantastic tool where we can use film equipment to literally see, like in Walt Disney films, a seed sprouting and then becoming a plant, blossoming, fruiting, and withering away. We can see in a moment what the Rosicrucians classically did through a process of observation that would take an entire year. They would watch every part of a growth process. Now, the observation of the life forces is something very significant and important. It develops a particular type of clairvoyant faculty inside of us to see how things move through life processes from one stage to another. This is a real divine mystery, and every human being holds this divine mystery to see what's held within it. Then, of course, the study of spiritual science, as we talked about before, is fundamental. We have to put down those concepts that allow us to logically understand how things fit together. As we're studying things, we have a particular practice called the dissolving practice. The dissolving practice is an alchemical way to read spiritual texts. So when you're reading a text from any spiritual tradition, what you're actually reading are words on a page. The words are the attempt of someone to crystallize into written language a direct spiritual experience they had. The only way to get to the core of what they're trying to tell you, without getting caught up in a fundamentalist or literalist trap, is to actually regain the experience they had. They're trying to communicate this through the words. This means the words have to be dissolved into a direct inner spiritual experience. So, it's a type of meditative reading. Once we can dissolve the spiritual text into the original experience, it opens up a great world for us. It is absolutely vital for going to deeper parts of spiritual teachings that have been preserved. Now, this is also connected to the next stage, which is something called Mycalic yoga. In the ancient schools, they taught a particular type of breathing. The way they breathed at that time was to actually make themselves more conscious by being conscious of the breath in and out. So there is a particular yoga of the inhale and exhale of the breath. What Steiner is basically saying with the Mycalic yoga is that for the Rosicrucian, we have the same inhale and exhale, but now it's done in pure consciousness. It's not done with the breath per se. When we inhale, in a sense, we observe the physical world, and that's what we would call a perception. We perceive something in the physical world, whether it's observing nature or a human being, whatever it is. We breathe in that perception, and that's a completely receptive activity. If I don't have a receptive soul, I can't do it. But we breathe that in and hold the perception inside of us. It might be the movement of a child, the growth of a flower, or whatever it is. Then, we breathe out the concept. A concept is where we can now see inside what we have perceived, the spirit inside of it. So instead of just breathing in and breathing out, we're breathing in the perception of the world receptively, and then actively breathing out the concept, where we now perceive the spirit in the world. The second three parts of these exercises include positivity, open-mindedness, and inner harmony. These practices, as explained by Rudolf Steiner, are considered indispensable components of the Rosicrucian path of inner development. They serve not only as ethical disciplines, but as spiritual technologies that cultivate the soul's capacity to receive higher knowledge and live in attunement with spiritual truth. Looking at positivity. In the context of spiritual practice, positivity is not mere optimism or blind cheerfulness, but a conscious effort to seek out and affirm the good in every situation, every person, and every experience. Steiner taught that within all of creation, even in what appears dark or difficult, there lies a kernel of good, something worth learning from or understanding. The exercise of positivity, therefore, becomes an active training of perception. We challenge ourselves to find the divine potential even in struggle, to recognize virtue in others where it might be obscured by flaws, and to maintain a grateful, upward gaze even when life offers resistance. Over time, this exercise purifies the soul's vision, allowing us to see through appearances and into the essence of things. Next is open-mindedness. This is the capacity to hold our judgments in suspension, to avoid premature conclusions, and to remain inwardly quiet when confronted with the unfamiliar. Steiner emphasized that truth often appears in unexpected forms, and that the spiritual seeker must learn to approach life with a receptive heart and a silent mind. Open-mindedness, then, is not about believing everything, but about cultivating a kind of inward spaciousness where new ideas, perspectives, or intuitions can be allowed to enter, take form, and be observed without distortion. It prepares the ground for true spiritual insight by loosening the grip of prejudice and conditioning. Finally, we arrive at inner harmony. This practice involves establishing a balanced relationship between our thoughts, feelings, and will, those three soul faculties discussed earlier. It means not allowing one faculty to dominate the others, but creating an inner rhythm where thought is clear, feeling is steady, and action is purposeful. Steiner described this as creating a kind of moral equilibrium within the soul. Inner harmony is not achieved overnight. It's cultivated by observing ourselves carefully and correcting imbalances gently over time. When we think one thing, feel another, and do something else entirely, we generate confusion and inner fragmentation. But when all three work together, we create a vessel strong enough to hold higher wisdom and spiritual light. Together, these 6 disciplines form the Steiner's 6 basic exercises. Practiced faithfully, they prepare the inner life for initiation by stabilizing the soul and making it a suitable instrument for higher perception. They are not ends in themselves, but living doorways to transformation. Thank you for watching. If you like our content, give it a thumbs up. See you in the next one.